Hi, my name is Bill Lokey, and today I want to talk to you about sexuality and intimacy. I think it's amazing that it's a topic that we talk about so little, except for maybe when we're joking around in the parking lot, which tells you maybe something about my story. But this is a topic that's really important. It's a topic in our marriages, in our relationship that's so important, and yet I think we know very little about each other and about this whole topic. And so I always want to start off by kind of having you first think about, where is it that you first learned about sex? Was there somebody in your life that you felt like in a very appropriate way came in and maybe could have been one of your parents, could have been a teacher, but someone that very appropriately taught you about sex at a good age, helped you understand what it was about? So that's the first question. I would say, think about, did anyone ever do that for you? Usually when I talk to audiences, I get about 10% or less of the people that say yes to that question. So then I always say, well, then where did you learn about sex? Because again, it's one of those topics that a lot of us are embarrassed to talk about. And so usually I begin to get the kinds of answers of learned about it in school. Learned about it on television or a movie. Somebody may say from a Playboy magazine, or all these different areas of where people learned about sex. Very few of them are someone that actually helped me in a very appropriate way to learn about it. Well, you think about where you began to first pick up and learn about sex. Maybe it was trial and error on a dating relationship or wherever it may have been. You begin to find that whatever it is you learned at some of those early times, you pretty well believed that was true, that it was accurate, until maybe later on in life you found out that maybe that's not so accurate. That's something that you carry forward with you. And then we begin to wonder, why is it that we struggle in some of our sexual relationship, especially in our marriage where we've got a long-term relationship? You know, for me, in my family growing up, I'm sure that my dad probably intended on having that conversation. Maybe he did and I don't remember it, but somehow I don't think I had that conversation or learned that. And so I'll never forget that I was somewhere around 11 years old, 10 or 11. So I didn't know about sex pretty much earlier than that. Remember going on a Saturday, going horseback riding. I remember my dad on a lot of Saturday mornings would take me to a stable in Percy Warner Park in Nashville. And I would go on this, usually it was a 2-hour trail ride. And I was usually just on my own, and it was beautiful to go out on Saturday mornings. And I remember this one particular summer Saturday morning, I was riding the horse through the trails, and I got near the back of the park, and there was this big field in the back of the park which hardly anybody was ever back there. It didn't have a lot of access. And as I was riding on the horse, this one summer morning, I look out in the field, there's a blanket. And on that blanket is this man and a woman, and they're in swimsuits, and he is laying on top kissing her, and they are going to town. Now, as an 11-year-old, I am sitting there looking at this like, oh my goodness, I don't get to see this very often. So my eyes are kind of glued to the scene. As the horse, though, continues to take me around the curve, through the edge of the field and back into the woods, my neck is becoming more and more flexible so that I can see directly behind me, because I'm wanting to take in as much of this scene as I can. Now, as soon as I get back in the woods, I already can't wait to tell a friend of mine that I was going to see the next day in church. Now, it was one of those things where this friend seemed to know a lot of stuff around sex and things, but even though he was my same age, and I always kind of wondered, where in the world did he learn some of this? So now I feel like I was armed with information. So the next day at church, which of course is a great place to talk about sex, right? No, not exactly. So out in the parking lot afterwards, he and I are out there talking, and I'm telling him about it. I was like, you will not believe what I saw. And he was like, what? And I was like, this couple having sex. He was like, no way, tell me. And I was like, all right. So I started telling him this couple, and they're in their swimsuits, and this man is kissing her, and he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. They're in their swimsuits? And I'm like, yeah. But he's on top and he's kissing her. And he was like, whoa. They're in their swimsuits. And I'm like, yeah. And my friend begins to tell me for the very first time what sexual intercourse was. And it's really hard to look cool when you're 11, when your mouth is hanging wide open, is going, what are you talking about? It was like, I have never heard this information before. I mean, like, where has this been all my life? All these 11 years of my life, I've never heard anything about this. Somebody needs to put this in the newspaper so that we can all glean from this and know something about this. Now, what my friend told me about sexual intercourse was true. However, it was really basic. It was basically this thing goes here. That was about all there was to it. And I knew at the time, I was like, there's got to be more to this story. Because part of it was even like, how does one even get into that situation to begin with? It's not like you walk around the corner and that just thing, you bump into somebody and it happens. So I was like, there's got to be more of understanding how does one even get into that kind of an intimate setting. So probably about a year later, I was home sick from school one day, one of those days where you're sick enough to stay home from school, but later on you get to feeling a little bit better. And so when I got to feeling better, I got up and started deciding to, I've never seen what was in my mom and dad's chest of drawers. Did you ever go rummaging around in those drawers in their chest of drawers? And so nobody's home, and I'm starting to pull out, and I'm finding some cool stuff. I mean, my dad's got this old camera, and it's like, this is pretty cool, and found a couple of other neat things. And then I see this paperback book in the top drawer, and I'm like, it's a curious place for a book because all the rest of the books are on our bookshelf. And what I found was this book that was actually an information book about sex written by a medical doctor to be really information. But as a probably 12 or 13-year-old, man, I am sitting down to try to read this thing, hoping it's going to come in handy one of these days. And it's hard to know how when you're done that day, when I was kind of finished that day, but not finished with a book, how do you dog-ear the page of a book you're not supposed to be reading so I can hide it again and finish it when I'm sick the next time. That book served me for a lot of years because it gave me information that I had no clue about, and I had nobody else really talking to me much about sex, except for one short, I think a 2 or 3 week class in health class when I was in 7th grade. And the teacher of the sex part of that, I'm not sure they knew much more than I did, or at least they didn't let on. So the information I got out of this book, while it was physically accurate, what I don't remember, and of course there's probably some stuff in there I don't remember, but what I don't remember is much about the complications that can occur in sex, especially when it comes around relationships. Like what happens when two people who have been together for a while and maybe they've been having sex pretty well, but what happens when there starts to be resentment that builds? Or what happens when one person's going through a crisis in their life and the other one's not? Or what happens when there's all kinds of complications that can occur? I know the book covered some of the medical or physical complications, but there are these other ones as well. And what I want to do is I want us to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that are really important to know that's not just about a birds and the bees talk. I'm assuming you have gotten that information elsewhere. But this is a little bit more around how sex and intimacy work together and kind of what happens when there isn't the emotional intimacy that goes along with the sex part. There is this thing that I think is interesting around sex when it comes to a marriage relationship or a long-term relationship where maybe you've been married to the person for a good while, that we know that sex is supposed to work in an intimate relationship. But why is it that sometimes when you think about growing up in a family, for a young child when they grow up and they're in this family, think about the ways that parents would begin to show that child love. Usually it might be ways of nurture and holding them and talking to them and playing, but also being nurturing and affectionate and those kinds of things. But also something that child never knows Another way the parent shows that they're loved is by making sure to be responsible for them, making sure there's a roof over their head, that they've got food to eat, that they've got jobs, that the bills are getting paid. If the child is sick, the parent steps in to help take care of them when they're sick and they don't feel well. All of these things are things that help a child to know that they're loved. But why is it that it seems oftentimes that those same kind of characteristics in an adult relationship, while that also helps an adult know that they feel loved, why is it that a lot of those things are the very things that pour cold water on sexual attraction, arousal? When you start talking about things like responsibility, taking care of the other one when they're in a time of weakness, sometimes even just nurture, are sometimes the very things we say are the things that pour cold water on, that stop the sexual arousal part. But if love is supposed to be something that we combine both of these and that we're supposed to have intimacy, then why is it that sometimes those things, especially around long-term relationships, are the things that some people feel like turns off the sexual arousal? And I want to help explain that a little bit and help you understand where your concept of sex may have come from an age earlier than when you thought you learned about sex. So what I want you to see, first of all, is a demonstration of just an example of where some of the attachment styles that happens when we're young and how some of those impact the way that we see really sex later on, how it begins to help our brain understand how sexual intimacy forms. So as we're talking about healthy sexuality and intimacy, I want you to look at, then a lot of you have learned about sex from all kinds of different places. If you didn't have a parent or someone that was appropriate to teach you at a right time about sex, then we learned it all over the place. Television, movies, trial and error, pornography. Sometimes once in a while a person will say in a church, and I'm like, well, that's an unusual one usually. But we just learn it from all over, and most of those sources are not really always reliable sources. But I would like to show you that we usually begin to learn at least having some feel for what sex is actually about at an even earlier age than when you think you learned about sex. So I've got a couple of people up here. Don't worry, this is not the sex part. This is, I want to show you at a very early age what healthy attachment and some of the unhealthy attachment styles really look like, and what that, we'll use this with them. So she's going to represent, Kim's going to represent a mom, David's going to be the son. And so again, in this mom-son relationship, when you were really young, what are some of the things, Mom, that you would likely do to show him that you love him when he's really young, 1, 2 years of age?
Hold him, love on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Affection.
Affection, nurture, those kinds of things to show him that you really care about him. And he's going to be getting that message. But also, without David even knowing it, you're going to be doing some other things around the realm of responsibility that we don't usually think of at first. But of course, you're going to be helping to make sure he's got a roof over his head. When he's sick, you're going to help take care of him. When he's hungry, that he's got some food, you're going to be doing those kinds of making sure the bills are paid. You're going to be doing those things in the background, and he's not going to even know about it. So he's going to be very slowly learning as a young child that love encompasses then at least nurture, affection, and doesn't even really know this other stuff, but when I'm sick, she's going to help take care of me. All these kind of physical needs, as well as the way you talk with them and interact. However, when we also get to at least the age of 2, and when we say children turn 2, we usually call them, what's that age? The terrible twos. I think partly it's because children at 2 have learned how to say the word no, which is really inconvenient when they're also starting to learn, wait a minute, I'm not you. I get to be my own separate person. However, while it's inconvenient time in the way they do it, they do it that way because they're immature. They're only 2. But it would be a lot worse if your child didn't individuate, and it would be a lot bigger problem later on. So he is beginning to learn that he's loved with mom, the way she's showing him. But even before the age of 2, he's also got this streak in him that does want to have some independence. And so let's say it's somewhere around maybe 1 or 2. They've got a fence around the backyard, so she knows he's going to be pretty safe. But he wants to go out in the backyard and play. So David, come on, out in the backyard. All right. Now over here in his backyard, David gets to be anybody he wants to be. I mean, you can be an astronaut. You can be a gold medal winner in the Olympics. You can be, who'd you used to pretend to be when you were a kid? Anything fun that was...
Yeah, probably just a musician.
Yeah, okay. He wants to be a musician. And he can immediately get up on stage and he can play anything in his imagination. And out there he is playing, he is doing it, and he is being those things. And part of what he's doing is he's exploring what it's like to be on my own, to have passions, to have likes. He's exploring all that stuff, and then he realizes he's hungry. He wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So back home he goes inside. If mom's a reasonably healthy mom, she's going to be like, great. She's not going to punish him for wanting to be outside for a little while. Comes in, fixes him a sandwich, and this thing repeats over and over again. And what David begins to learn as he grows up, is he begins to learn that love encompasses at least 2 things. And one of those is that love is shown by nurture, caring, affection, but it also, this part of this one side of love, also includes responsibility. Making sure that the bills get paid, making sure that we take care of things. If one of us is sick, we can begin to even help take care of. But isn't it interesting that some of those very things that we know is love are some of the very things that pours cold water on the sexuality and the arousal? And so it's like we want to see how in the world do we get both of these things integrated in an intimate relationship? And so as he grows up, he not only knows he wants these things, but he also learns that he wants to know how to do independence. And over here as independent, then he can begin to explore what it is that he likes. And this is part of the precursor to sex, where you're beginning to know, I got to know what it is that I like, what feels good to me. I can explore my own passions. I can have an independent self. Because to have an intimate relationship, I've got to have a me before I can have a we, an us. If I don't have a me, then in our codependence, we kind of like just whatever you want, but we really don't feel that way, and the resentment begins to build up, and eventually that explodes. And so then he can begin to learn that love includes both of these things. It includes, come on back over here, this together, and how do I do this together? But it also includes, come on over here, this independent part so that I get to know who I am. And so part of a secure attachment allows us to realize that both of these things are a part of a healthy love. So now I want to show you is more of one of the unhealthy templates that some of us may have grown up out of. So come on back home. We're going to start again with him being young. And so at an early age, David kind of, again, you want to begin to branch out in the world, but this time, Mom, grab his arm, tell him, don't leave.
Don't leave.
And what's one reason? What's one reason you might say, don't leave?
You might get hurt.
Yeah, you're going to need me. You may get hurt. This big world is scary out there. Or sometimes the message you get is, don't leave me because I need you. And what a lot of people have also grown up with is this sense of, I'm going to feel way too guilty if I go off and leave this parent for whatever reason and circumstances they really need me. So the reaction in some of those in that template is that some people don't leave. They may physically leave, but what actually takes place is that they emotionally are at least like, I know she's going to need me and I'm going to feel way too guilty, or I'm scared of branching out. I'm going to need the security. I'm going to need the nurture. And so they just don't leave. And what they do is they sacrifice this place over here of the need of independence. They sacrifice that need so that they can either help the parent or they get what they need, and they grow up. And oftentimes this person in adulthood is a person that grows up that will say in a relationship maybe, we are good friends. We're best friends, my spouse and I, in our marriage, but we just don't have any kind of passion. We don't have any sexual energy. We don't. One of them oftentimes will say, my spouse doesn't ever hold me or hug me or kiss me. There's no physical. And because a lot of times in this scenario, in this template, what they've learned is, I know how to do friendship, I know how to do caring, I know how to do nurture, but I don't know how to do this independent thing where I know what my passions are. It just feels like, I can't do that. And even if they were sexual, trying to be sexual, it'd be like, it feels like, with my parent or something. So that's one template then that's a kind of an insecure template of, I just never leave. All right, another template. So another one is, he's young, he's starting to want to get out, be independent, but mom, you still grab his arm. And this time when you say, don't leave for whatever reason, this time you still kind of break away, but you're ambivalent about it. And it's like you're kind of in the middle. You get away. Yep, she's holding on pretty good. So you get away just enough to kind of get out of the grips. Yep, yeah, you got to pull a little harder.
Okay.
And this is hard.
Yeah.
For this person, it's like, I don't want to hurt her, or I don't want her to be mad at me, or wow, am I going to get hurt? And so there is this pull away, but it's also, I want this, but I don't know how to get all the way over there. And so there's this ambivalent place in the middle. And this person, oftentimes, when they grow up to be an adult, what they will say is, I started off in a romantic relationship, and man, there were fireworks. I mean, we had passion, we felt this. But as our attraction for each other, the more we got close to each other emotionally, the more the physical attraction started to go away. The sexual attraction started to go away. And it was like, no, I can't do that with this person now that I feel really, really emotionally close to. And so it's oftentimes that relationship comes out of this template. All right, so come on back home. So another one, we got two more. Another one is, mom, grab his arm. Nope, you're not leaving. And this time, man, you break away and you are gone. You're way over here. And if she's living in Tennessee, you may move to California. This person often likely will have a physical distance. Wherever this person goes, he or she, and it can be male or female on these, he or she, though, could be one that you're like, oftentimes these people are pretty successful, either in a business or really enjoy being a volunteer in an organization. They really oftentimes know what it's like to be passionate about things. They really know how to do independence, but they don't have a clue how to do an emotional relationship. A lot of people, it's weird how this works, but a lot of people really are attracted to this kind of person, be it male or female, because this person, there's no question that they're strong. We see their strength. And it's like, oh yeah, they really know who they are. But as we begin to be in that relationship, maybe when you were dating, maybe like, I know they've had 20 unsuccessful relationships, but I'll change them. I'll be the one that makes something different. My love's going to heal them. And then in 6 months, a year, whatever long it takes, as you start to get close, it's like, boom, and they just move away, physically or at least emotionally. So for a moment, put your arms out like this. It's almost as if they feel like that if they get too close, they're going to get completely engulfed by this parent. And they're going to lose their identity completely. And it's just like, ah. So I want us to understand these templates are not rational templates. It's not like I'm thinking through this. This person, as they get to be a young adult, may even say, I really want to be in this relationship. I've met somebody. I really like them. I may even love them. And so they may even see a counselor to kind of help deal with some of this. And then begin to get closer. And he's like, okay, I commit to certain things. But when there is a place, there is this tipping point that oftentimes when it happens, it starts to feel like this. And boom, they're gone. And then again, the other one's like, what happened? And even they may go, I don't know what happened. It was just like, ugh. So you can put your hands down now. It may get a little heavy. So I want to know that it's not a rational template. It's literally just an emotional reaction, which again is kind of like trauma in that sense of this fight, flight, or freeze. I just feel like, I got to get. Now, one more. Come on back home. This time, you two come this way just a little bit because I got to have a little space. This time, it's you. And so he's still young, you're still getting nurtured, and then mom leaves. Either physically leaves, or becomes involved in an affair, or gets divorced, or becomes involved in an addiction where there's no emotional ability to connect. And now you're left over here still trying to figure out, where am I going to get this nurture? Where am I going to get this? And so when this person grows up, male or female, guess who it is they're looking for? Who would you imagine they're looking for in a relationship?
Mom.
Yeah, looking for a parent.
Yeah.
Someone who's still going to fill this thing. And oftentimes what will happen is they may even marry someone who's 10 or 12 years older, but if not, even if not the age is different, there's still this person is still looking for someone who likely their wounds are going to match in a way of like, oh, that person really needs to take care of somebody. And this person really needs to be taken care of. And so again, initially it looks like a really wonderful fit until finally this person's going, God, why are you fussing at me all the time, telling me what to do? And the other one's like, well, why are you so immature? And boom, there we have, we've recreated the template. And so one of the things that's really important, you can turn back now. One of the things that's really important in these templates is to know we've got to heal the templates. Otherwise, we just recreate the templates in our relationships. And so the way we heal these templates is oftentimes doing our individual work, doing individual therapy work or understanding where the wounds came from. I'm a big proponent for couples therapy. I think couples work is great. And you can even do the individual work in couples work while your spouse is witnessing you doing your own individual work, because it really builds empathy. But it's this individual work of understanding, where did the wound come from and what's the message I got from that, so that I'm still trying to react to that. And then from there I can begin to realize, oh, I can have a self and I can have an us, and really find how to do that in a much, much healthier way from a very more of a secure attachment place. So thank you guys very much. Hope this is helpful. So you see after this how that even as a very young person growing up in the world, we begin to take on an understanding of what intimacy looks like, but also, am I able to see myself as being on this place over here where there is a sense of passion and understanding. So as I recount what just happened very briefly, over here growing up, I learned about love, I learned about vulnerability, I learned about emotional closeness. This is where I learned how to have emotional connection. And yet you also saw there's this other part of me that from a very early age we have longed to have independence. We want to go out and explore, learn who it is that I am without my mom or my dad, without these protective people. I want to go explore, because when I go in my backyard as a kid, I can be an Olympic athlete, I can be an astronaut, I can be anything I want to be. And I get to explore that in my independence. But then when I'm ready to come back for my security, I can come back over here. And if my parents or if my caregiver is healthy and they have a sense of secure attachment, they're not going to punish me for wanting to go explore my independence. They're ready to welcome me and say, yeah, this is a safe place for you. And then when we grow up, we go back out into the world, and out in the world is where I get to explore. And so from that demonstration, I want you to understand that this is really important, that those of us that grew up in a place where we learned that both emotional nurture and vulnerability and being close emotionally, but also being able to explore my own independence and be myself and kind of go out into the world and see what there is there, at least as a child. But as an adult, to also know who it is that I am and what it is that I want, to understand that love includes both of those things, brings together a mature kind of love. Because sex, you understand, is this very interesting thing. It's much more complex than just feeling good. Because what sex demands of us, if I'm in a relationship, is what it says is that, first of all, I need to understand, so I'm standing over here to represent this extreme, I need to understand who it is that I am. What is it that I want? What is it that feels good to me? What's passion that I'm passionate about? What physically feels good? But I also need to understand how to be with this other person. And how do I understand what it is that they want and what feels good to them and what feels like right passionate for them? And so then what I've got to be able to do is I've got to be fully able to feel my feelings, my physical feelings and spiritual and everything else in this that makes it fulfilling, but I've also got to know how to be with someone else. Because if all I'm doing is just being sexual for myself and my own gratification, then that's not about relational sex. It's not about intimacy. The problem is that if all I learned how to do was just be emotionally connecting, but I never at an early age learned that it was okay to also explore and have some independence and learn how to step into the world and explore the world, then all I know how to do is to do this emotional connection, and then I'm afraid of being sexual. And so one of the things that we found is that oftentimes this person that never learned how to step out and to learn anything about themselves, in their adult relationships, oftentimes they'd said, I don't understand our marriage because one of the persons may say, we have a great friendship. We have a lot of intimacy. We can talk about anything, but there's no passion. There's no attraction. They may say that one of the spouses, one of the partners, who maybe developmentally didn't understand how to find themselves, they just knew how to be emotionally connected. They may say, that person doesn't really seem like they're attracted to me physically. Sometimes they'll say, they don't even want to hold me or kiss me. Oftentimes, then that relationship winds up with this sense of, well, we have friendship, but we don't have much anything else. What we also can sometimes see then in adult relationships is another person who maybe they know that they want independence, and I don't mean independent from their partner. They want to know who they are as a person and their strength, but they're afraid because growing up, maybe they were afraid that their parent was going to need them emotionally. Maybe that parent told them that they did. They were afraid to leave, and so then you have this ambivalent person who wants to also know what it's like to live fully, but I'm afraid I'm going to be needed. And this person oftentimes sexually as an adult will be the one that they'll say maybe initially in a romantic relationship there was fireworks, there was passion, but the more emotionally close we got, the more I felt like I couldn't be sexual with him anymore. And so this person oftentimes will even say, I can be sexual with someone I don't know very well, but when I've really gotten emotionally close to someone, I can't be sexual with them anymore. Oftentimes that comes out of that template. Then a third one is when a person who maybe a parent was really pulling on them, and you may have seen this in the sculpt, but this person as maybe an adolescent, they really break away and they're like, no, I don't want to be held on to. I don't want to lose my identity. And they come breaking out over here to go, I want my identity. And so their life is all about now their own identity. They come across as a very strong person. Oftentimes they're even a person who does well in a business or volunteering for an organization. They've usually moved geographically pretty far away from their family. If their family lived in Tennessee, maybe they moved to California. And they're maybe doing really well, and because you see them as a strong person, and they may know how to do passion, but they don't have a clue how to do emotional intimacy. And so you may know a person like this. Maybe you've been in a relationship with a person like this, and maybe this is you. But the person who says maybe even, I want to be close, I want to have a romantic relationship where we can work, but every time it starts to feel just a little bit too close, this person just breaks away, either emotionally or physically. And it's like, I just can't go there. Now, I want you to know these templates are not rationally thinking templates. It's not like this person says, I don't want that, because in their brain, in their thinking brain, they may be going, I do want a good relationship. But there's something about that when they feel the emotional closeness is starting to invade, like they were afraid maybe that caregiver was when they were young, was invading upon them, then as an adult they start to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my identity, and phew, they're out of there. And they just can't stay in that relationship. But the person who is more of a healthy template understands that love involves both emotional and vulnerable connection, but also knows kind of who they are and can develop their own strengths. That's where these two places are. Now, there is a researcher and a writer whose name is Esther Perel, and I read a lot of her research, and one of the things I really liked about her research was that she asked a question across 20 different countries. So it wasn't just in our Western culture, it was in other countries. But she asked the question, when are you most attracted to your partner? And she said basically answers fell into three categories. One was, the first one was, I'm most attracted to my partner when they're away. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not fair. And it's like, well, not just when they're away, but when they've been away long enough for me to begin to miss them and to start imagine being with them again. So think about, how is it that your partner is in your imagination when you're missing them and you imagine being with them again? Usually it's at some of their best. The second answer was, I'm most attracted to my partner when they're in their flow. They're doing their thing that they do really well. They're in their strength. And when a person's in their strength, usually they're not even thinking about their own neediness or their own weakness. They're just doing whatever they do, and they do it well, not even thinking much about it. That's the second answer as to where partners were most attracted to their spouse. The third one was, I'm most attracted to my partner when we're in a unique setting or we're laughing together. A couple of specific answers in her research was when she's on stage, or when, I think on that one it was when she's wearing her cowboy boots, because you know there's a little attitude that goes with that, or when he's wearing his tuxedo. And again, in those unique settings, we're again feeling a little bit of our strength, a little bit of that attitude. All three of those answers have to do with, I find my partner most attractive when they're in their strength. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be needy and have our needs as vulnerable human beings. We've got to have that too. But what the research is saying to us is, because Brené Brown's research also talks about the importance of vulnerability. So what the research is saying is, as adults, we need these same two things. One of the things is it's important for me to understand that I need to know how to be emotionally vulnerable. I need to know how to step in with my partner to say, this is what's really going on with me right now, or this is really who I am, or this is what I'm struggling with. I want you to really know me and to see my weaknesses and to understand me so that they know I'm safe and I can be connected. But it's also important, the research then says, that I develop my strengths. That I know who it is that I am, and I continue to develop those parts of me that are strong and that I like about myself. To develop both of these things. And it's interesting that over here in the emotional vulnerability, we can be close to our partners, But in my private practice, it was always a sad day that sometimes I would hear when one person of a couple would come in and meet with me privately. Sometimes I would hear them say, I would never want my husband or my wife to know this, but I don't see them as a strong person. I see them as a good friend, as someone I love, but I don't really see their strength. And they said I would never want them to know that because it would be feel like a death blow to them. And I believe that where that comes from is that when we've spent energy about learning how to do the emotional closeness, but we also don't learn how to continue to develop our strengths. What is it that makes me spiritually strong, physically strong, emotionally, intellectually, all of those things that I really like about me and who it is that I think makes me a better person? It's about also developing those parts of me. And then what this is saying is there'll be emotional intimacy, but there'll also be attraction. And those two things are really important in a relationship. When we have those things, then we can begin to build into not just the sexuality and the attraction, but also we're going to begin to build into this emotional intimacy that's a very, very important piece of the relationship. Now, there's a third thing. We begin to also find that a third thing that was important in the relationships was not only the emotional vulnerability and this developing our strengths, but it was also learning what is it in our partner, in our spouse, that we could speak into that was a positive. Something inside of them that maybe weren't even sure that shows up very much, that you could say, this is something I see in you. And we found that it would fan this spark to life again. So let me give you an example. My wife and I were going to see The Lion King, the Broadway play, which, and I remember just when the animated movie came out, I loved the story. So we're sitting at this play, and we're watching this. And if you know the story at all, you know that midway through, Simba, the lion cub, thinks that he's responsible for his father's death, who was the Lion King. And when he thinks he's responsible, he runs off into the wilderness, into the desert, to get away from his cares, finds a couple of odd traveling companions, and they give him the advice that the best thing to do is just forget about your troubles, forget about your cares, and just be out here and stay away from all the problems of life. Until finally, the symbol of wisdom, though, shows up, Rafiki, and he finds Simba, the cub, and he brings him to a body of water, and he has him look into the water, and he sees his reflection in the water. And he first sees his own reflection, and then he sees the reflection of his father, who was the Lion King that died. And in that moment, he sees that that is inside of himself. My wife, Laurie, turns to me at that moment and looks at me, and to my surprise, she says, I see that in you. The tears start coming down my face because I never dreamed anyone would say that about me. In fact, most of my life, I felt like I had heard people say kind of the opposite. But I longed for to hear someone goes, I see a king in you. And in that moment, when Laurie says that to me, not only did I feel the tears, but I also felt this determination of, well then, by George, if you see that in me, I want to learn how to live up to that. And I became really aware of how do I learn to not only be a loving person, but how do I also learn to be loving with my strength? How do I do those two things together? And that was something that's really, really important. That we learned that that's a part of intimacy. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about what happens sexually when there's not this emotional intimacy. Because that's also important to understand how that these two, when they get separated, it's not really good for the relationship. And so I want to talk to you just for a moment about that. So one of the things I want us to look at then is if there is not this connection, or if that's been going away and it's more now just in the relationship the only thing that sex is becoming more of just sex and sexual gratification. Now, one of the things that starts to happen is we've got kind of one of two extremes I want to talk about. And on one side is really about then that the sex becomes more about genitals, becomes more about the physical. It becomes more about just getting the gratification, about the feelings. It could be the orgasm. Could be more of whatever that is. I like what Esther Perel says even about that in some of her research. She says, foreplay doesn't happen 10 minutes before the orgasm. It starts 10 minutes after the orgasm. Meaning really it's the way we live our life with each other in our marriage that helps us to begin to really find ourselves drawn to each other so that we're also sexually attracted, but we want to be connected sexually. When it's just about sex, and it's more of just about that, and we really don't feel connected to the other person, then after the orgasm, there's really a loneliness. There's this place of like, God, now if there's not connection, after the orgasm is a pretty lonely place to be, when there's no connection with the other human being. So sometimes it's just around sex. Another thing, sex can look like a little bit like entitlement sex. I remember working with a couple when I was doing some of my private practice years ago, and they had gotten married in their 60s. She had said, I'm trying to keep up. My husband wants to be sexual really, really often. And but she said, recently I've had a death in the family and I just don't feel sexual right now. And he looked at me at that point and said, well, I gave her a day off. And at that moment, it was just like, what? Because there was this sense of entitlement for him that was about, look, we're married now. I need to be able to get sex. And so I'll just give her a little bit here, but this is more about me. There are those moments that are of shock value that happen, but when it's about entitlement again, and I'm thinking about me, then it's not about the relationship. The sexuality is going to lose anything but just the physical. There's also the part about that sex can be just about relief-oriented sex. If there's problems or difficulties in the relationship, and it may be, well, I'm really getting where I want to be sexual again, let's find a way to do that. And so here's a pattern that I see over and over again, and I just want to bring this up for a moment. Sometimes, I would say most of the time, if you're listening to this and you're in a marriage or a committed relationship, oftentimes what happens is one person wants to be sexual more than the other person. Just seems to happen that way. And so oftentimes I will also hear a person say, you know, I've tried to approach my spouse, I've tried to approach them and I keep getting rejected enough to where I just feel rejection a lot. And so a lot of the times now I just don't even go to them. I just don't even try to bring it up. But because of the sexual urge that I've got, they'll wind up masturbating just to be able to get the sexual relief. Now, one of the difficulties with this, though, is that when there is just masturbation, to avoid the confrontation that may come in saying, I'd like to be sexual, is the obvious. You miss out on the confrontational. And some of them may be going, well, duh, that's why I do it. But I want you to understand that it's in the conflict where we actually gain a lot of the intimacy. One of the things I want to invite us into is we need to learn how to be able to talk and have some language about our sexual relationship with each other, with a husband and wife. We've got to be able to, even though it may be embarrassing, to be able to say, we've got to begin to learn to talk about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Or even if I'm not in a relationship right now, what is it that's happening to me, and why is it that, what do I do with all this energy? Because to understand that means to go, okay, and I'm understanding where I'm taking this energy and where I'm putting this. That's a really important piece to this. Otherwise, it just becomes more and more secret. And so that's one of the things that I will witness. Also in relationships, we find out that if you've been in a relationship long enough, or if you have gotten old enough, you've probably experienced losing some of your sexual arousal. For men, it's a little more obvious than it is for a woman. The flag goes down. Hard to get the flag back up. And so when that happens, there's shame. There's this fear of, oh my gosh, this can't happen again. And so we do anything we can to try to make sure that next time we can perform. And so one of the things, again, a problem with this is where sometimes a person will go is to go, I've got to make sure that I can stay aroused in having sex, that I don't lose my arousal. And so one of the things that people will turn to sometimes is viewing sexual material. Online, of course, it's so easy to find these days. Seeing videos, pictures, whatever it is that's arousing. And then the person may go, if I look at this and I get sexually aroused, then I can be able to perform well with my partner and everything can go okay. The problem, again, is, one of several problems, is that whatever it is that's the amount of sexual material that you may look at that arouses you, after a couple of times, that doesn't quite do it as much for you anymore. So it takes a little bit different or more kind of material, which then later it takes a little bit more and a little bit different, until finally, one of the things that's going on is, instead of thinking about your partner and it being relational, you're thinking about the performance and you're thinking about images that maybe you've seen in these sexual images. And then where your brain is going is completely into around performance and sexual arousal, but it's not. You're missing your partner. You're missing your spouse. You're not even there. You're not even connected. And so what even can develop is an intimacy disorder, which usually is an addiction. Doesn't always turn into an addiction, but we begin to lose the ability of even knowing where my heart is, because now I'm just in the arousal and I'm trying to just be sexual. And so some of the interesting studies that have been even done in the last several years is even looking at some people that regularly viewed sexual material and then masturbated to that as a way of relieving themselves of their sexual arousal. They began to find that after a while, and this was really startling, that after a while, some of them were losing the ability to be sexually aroused by a human. And when that started to happen, it was like, oh, no, because I want to be able to do this with a human. I want to be able to have a partner, and when I get married, or if they're married, to be sexually aroused by my partner. I began to realize this was a problem. And so it was like, I got to be able to stop using pornography or sexual images so that my brain can maybe reverse and heal and be able to get back to where I can find arousal again. And so that's another one of the issues that can come out of sometimes just wanting to be aroused, and I don't wind up being ashamed or embarrassed. Or it can go into acting out, where we actually act out sexually with another person, an affair, maybe even with dangerous behavior. And so then it becomes where the only thing that really arouses that template in my brain for sex is actually even some really dangerous behavior. All of these things can move in that direction when my relationship, if I'm married with my spouse, is not in an emotionally intimate relationship, so that we work those kinds of things out and still learn how to be aroused with each other sexually. If it just becomes about sex, then you can begin to see that there is kind of not a stopping point much. It begins to just continue to escalate, where oftentimes then it becomes looking like sexual addiction. It doesn't always mean it becomes sexual addiction, but it can begin to move in that direction. And then usually when there is shame that comes out of that, the sexual acting out can help kill the feeling of shame for a while, and that is a part of the cycle that is a part of sexual addiction. Now there's another side to this too, which can be the opposite side, which is just that a person can feel like in a marriage or in a relationship that, well, I don't really want to be sexual. And so sometimes it feels like, well, I just need to be sexual to be just dutiful, which might sound like, well, okay, I guess it's time, let's just do it, which of course is not going to be gratifying for either person. It can also be exchange sex. where this isn't usually verbalized in a relationship, but what often happens is one person who doesn't really want to be sexual as much may say inside, okay, I'll be sexual as long as you will do this for me, or as long as you won't talk about my issues, or whatever that may be. There can be just good old avoidance, or if there's been oftentimes a traumatic event in your life around sex, there can be really dissociative sex, where a person who's maybe experienced sexual abuse or some sort of sexual trauma may begin to find that whenever they try to be sexual with their partner, it is so much that it triggers that trauma, and they go into a place of dissociating. And that's the only way they can even physically stay present to be sexual. Or sometimes maybe you can't be sexual at all. And so this is the other side of kind of two extremes around sexuality when there's not the building of the relationship. But when there's the building of the emotional relationship as well, the intimacy, it doesn't mean the sex part's going to work perfectly. You're still going to have issues, obviously, just that's the way it is in life. But we can begin to work on building and figuring out what's going on. Do we need to get help? Do we need to meet with a therapist, someone that can help us through some of these things? Is there one person that needs to do some work, especially if there's around some trauma? But even while we're dealing with the sexual relationship that isn't maybe working real well for both people, but we still have an intimate relationship. And I want you to know that is more than a consolation prize. Building that is what it really is going to come down to, is that while we struggle with the sexuality part, maybe in a relationship, it's having the relationship where we care about each other, we know each other, we are for each other, and then we can still struggle with the details around the sexual part. Sex can be great, it can be amazing, it can be fun, it can also be a barometer of the relationship, but I want you to know that if you've been in a relationship for very long, you're going to know that there comes a point where sex isn't always perfectly mutual and doesn't go exactly well. And so that's where we have to step into loving each other and respecting each other well enough to say, look, you're my partner. You're the person I love. We don't see this eye to eye, but how do we still step and stand next to each other and face this issue and work with that together? That's something that's extremely important. So as I begin to close out, I want to come together with back to these two kind of places that we talked about in the love initially with this. And I want to close with a couple of stories. Because what I want to do is I want to call us to a level of honesty with each other that's more than just being honest about conflict, being honest about issues, but it's about honesty and owning myself at a deeper level when we talk about over here, remember, representing emotional vulnerability and being real. So my story for over here is several years ago, Laurie, my wife, and I were watching a movie on TV. And we both do this kind of work for a living. And this meaning we're both therapists and we hear some tough stories. And one night we were watching this movie, and near the end of the movie it was obvious that this child was going to die, probably in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. And so there was this place where I was just like, I just can't feel this and take this on and feel this in the movie, because I had a rough day of hearing stories. And so what I did is I just kind of quietly got up off the couch, walked out into the back patio, and just sat down. It was a summer evening, and I thought I'll just sit out here and wait until the movie's over with. And then Laurie will come outside and we'll sit down and we'll kind of talk about the end of the movie and kind of why I went out there. And so I'm sitting out there after the movie's over with, and I'm waiting on Laurie, and finally 10 minutes is over with. It's 15 minutes, and finally I'm looking at my watch going, well, where is she? And then my brain does this crazy thing. my brain does this thing of like, well, let's just see how long it will take. Because if she really loves me, she will, and you can fill in your own blank. But for me, it was like, she'll come out here and find out what's going on. And so I wait a few more minutes, and then she walks out on the patio and she says, very lovingly and tenderly, "What are you doing?" Which is not exactly what I thought she was going to say. And I was like, well, you know, at the end of the movie, and I didn't want to see that, and it felt sad, and wasn't sure I was ready for that. And so I just walked out, I was telling her that. And she said, well, I just wondered, because you just walked out on the patio without telling me where you were going, leaving me to watch this sad ending of a movie all by myself. And frankly, I had no idea where you were. And I'm like, this isn't going at all the direction I thought this was going to go in. So now, of course, I'm getting defensive, and I'm starting to really defend myself. And right in the middle of it, she says, you know, I'm not doing this. And she turns and walks back in the house. And my heart rate now is pounding. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I literally started to get up and go in the house and have this argument over what? When fortunately recovery kicks in, and I sit back down and I'm like, what in the world is going on? And then I realized what was happening inside of me. So I get up and I go inside, and I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't even realize that I went off and left you and didn't even tell you where I was going, and you had to watch the sad ending by yourself. But it's actually worse than you think. I was actually on the back porch putting you to the test. And I'm sorry, because you know what? You don't deserve that. And you know what she said? Because she could have said, you're an idiot. But what she said was, thank you, because it was crazy out there when I was trying to talk to you. Sometimes yours and my brain does this crazy thing like that. Sometimes your partner or your spouse's brain is going to do that crazy thing. And when it happens, it's going to feel true. Problem is most of the time it's not true. And what I discovered was inside of you and me, deep inside of us, there is this wounded core belief. And if we don't understand what it is, it will trip us up over and over again. And what I discovered mine was inside of me, I realized there was this wounded core belief that said, in the end, after all is said and done, after you've done whatever you're going to do, you will get left alone. And so when my wife had walked back in the house, I thought, oh, this is it. It's happening. And I was ready to go back in and have that argument when I realized that's not what's going on. That's not who she is. The core in me was the one that was driving me to head that off at the pass, because this wound, this old wound, was the part of me that was causing it to feel that's what was going on. And so over here, I want to invite us into this place of vulnerability emotionally where we're honest with each other. Those relationships that really matter, especially of your spouse or close friend, that instead of us just being distant, that we can say sometimes, you know what, we were just in that argument a minute ago and I said this thing, that's really not true. I think I was just saying that to manipulate you. And I don't want to do that. So here's what's really true. To really step in and own the darkness of our hearts sometimes, because when we do, usually our partner is going to be able to look to us and go, thank you, because it was really feeling crazy there for a while when you were being defensive. And then over here, this place that represents developing our strength. Lastly, I just want to say, a number of years ago, before I worked at Onsite, I used to be the senior clinical director at Onsite, and before that I worked at a treatment center in Nashville, and the owner of the treatment center, he and I were good friends, and we would talk, sometimes these very honest conversations, and one day we were talking about what it is that our wives were attracted to about us. And I was like, yeah, I know, I don't understand this, because I can see my wife in her underwear, and I get turned on, but she can see me in mine, and nothing. It's like, what is fair about that? We were laughing. And he said, yeah, I know. He said, I had a recent conversation with my wife similarly. And he said, I didn't really understand why she was attracted. He said, it was a couple of weeks later, and it was in December, cold day. And he said, we looked out our window, and our next door neighbor was up on a ladder, hanging lights on his gutter to decorate for the holidays. And he said that my wife points out the window and says, that's what I'm attracted to. And he said, George? And she said, no, not George. She said that a husband will brave the cold and go out and do something uncomfortable because he loves his family. And we both kind of looked at each other and we were kind of like, we still don't understand. But if we did understand, we might even use those kinds of understandings to manipulate and try to get someone to be attracted or our partner to be attracted. What I want to invite us into is a level of honesty and realness and vulnerability where we say, I want to treat you with love and respect. I want to be real, but I also want to be engaged in my life where I'm developing the areas of my life that make me a better man or a better woman, that make you the kind of person that you really want to be, which then brings about also both sides of this thing that helps us build stronger relationships. And it doesn't mean that if we do those things that sexually everything's going to be great. It does, however, increase the chances of sexual arousal toward each other, of sexual attraction toward each other, and the desire to work out those sexual differences with each other. But you may also find that in that process, which is usually a lifelong process, you'll find that you're drawn to each other because you realize you know each other, you know that they know you, and that you really care about the other one rather than just being caring about your own desires. I hope this can be helpful in some way for you where you are in your relationship and in your life right now. Thanks.